Destruction plays, and her wounds worsen. The cleansing foretold is preordained.
Hey! Hello and welcome, Exiles, to my look at Doedre's Undoing, or better known as Impending Doom from PoE 1. You might be thinking, that skill looks like a pretty cool Curse Explosion skill, and it is. I cast Despair on my enemy, it blows up and deals damage. How does this occur? It's through this support gem, which is effectively Impending Doom. And basically what it is you scale your curse to activate as fast as possible, therefore it blows up and deals the damage in sort of immediate fashion. And then you scale its flat damage through intelligence. It says the explosion will deal damage based on 200% of intelligence. More intelligence, more flat damage, more cast speed, more procs, more damage. You get the idea. Now, this support gem has a lot of, I don't know, should I call it bugs or some things that seem like they would work but don't work? Let's kind of go through some examples. So first of all, a good example is, as far as I can tell, it doesn't have a base crit chance. In other words, scaling crit doesn't really work, except maybe Blood Mage over crit overwrites it. Outside of that, I think you can't scale crit. That's one thing to know. Another thing to know is certain support gems that sound like they would work may not work. For example, Control Destruction, which says supported spells deal 25% more damage. Does it work? As far as I can tell, it does. And you can check your Doedre's tooltip via hovering a node that would affect it and pressing Alt. So like right now it says your Doedres is going to deal 88k. That's what it is thinking it deals. Although some of this stuff is a little bit buggy, like it doesn't really know, it doesn't account for cast speed, but cast speed definitely helps. Like for example, if you cast your Despair faster, you're going to get more procs, but the tooltip doesn't factor that in. So there's some wonky stuff like this. So I take out Control Destruction, you'll notice the tooltip went down. It now says we deal 72k instead of what was 88k or whatever it was saying. Now, another thing that you'll notice is certain things that would appear to be much similar to that is considered casting, which says more spell damage or supported spell skills deal 35% more damage. This doesn't work. I'll like put this in right now and you'll see it was 72k when we didn't have Control Destruction, and it's still 72k. So there's certain support gems that just outright don't work. So the biggest tip I have to start off with, if you think it does or doesn't work, try swapping in the support and see if it changes the tooltip. Theanother thing to note is the skill is labeled as a hazard, and there are things like there's a support gem that rearms your hazard, which is effectively supposed to mean you can get a second proc out of it. As far as I could tell, that wasn't working like at all. I tested it on a single enemy and like never got a double hit, so I don't think that works. Same with nodes like this. Hazard retrigger doesn't work. Percent hazard damage, even though it's labeled as a hazard, does not appear to affect it. It doesn't affect it. So there's a bit of wonkiness there. And then outside of that, additional casting skills help as well, but some may not be as good as you realize. A good example of this is Spell Echo. Spell Echo, I just figured was a best in slot, and I used it for most of my gameplay on the character until I realized yesterday it doesn't actually echo the entire cast. So for example, right now I cast and I get a spell cascade that can hit an enemy 3 times. If I put in Spell Echo, it does give 30% less cast speed, but I would think, even though it has that 30% less cast speed, I'm still getting twice the amount of hits, so it should be a net damage gain. However, as far as I can tell with Spell Cascade, you don't get 6 hits, you get 4 hits. So you go from 3 to 4. So it gives you 33% more damage, but then it says 30% less damage in terms of cast speed, which effectively means you put it on and you lose damage when you put it on. So just be a little bit cautious of supports like this. As far as I can tell, the additional hits are not, it's not actually double hits. It's only one extra hit on top of the triple hit you were already getting. So that's something to keep in mind as well. It's probably decent if you don't have a triple overlap. If your spell cascade isn't overlapping anyways, then it's a good option. But if you have a triple overlap from spell cascade, then it becomes a bad option, if I'm making sense. Another thing you can go for is something like deliberation. This might sound like, hey, supported skills, 20% more damage. That sounds good. Doesn't seem to show up on the tooltip, probably doesn't work, that sort of thing. Unleash is also a good option. I ended up settling on Tool's Stillness. Unleash would be more single target, but Tool's Stillness just means you freeze a lot of things and you turn a lot of things into ice cubes throughout the mapping. So you can try out some different supports, but the supports that I've found that work really well for me are Controlled Destruction, Zenith, and Cascade. One thing about Controlled Destruction I will say, with Spell Cascade, I have it up to 4.9 meters. For a controller player where the game always properly targets the enemy as directly in the center, this works for triple overlap. The circles are like basically touching, and from my testing, even on small bosses, this gives me 3 hits. However, if you're playing on mouse and keyboard where you're not always going to have a precise cast that puts the boss directly at the center, that means you're probably only going to get 2 hits and you need to invest a little bit more into AoE. But from my experience, the 4.9 meter radius is the breakpoint for something like controller, where you always auto target directly in the center to get the consistent triple hit. If you're playing on mouse and keyboard, you probably need a bit more AoE investment, something like investing into more arsonists. Speaking of arsonists, now that we've gone over the Doedres Undoing, that's the mechanics of it. Scale int gives you base damage. Cast speed means you proc more often. And spell damage scales the damage tooltip. Oh, one more thing that I forgot to go over: faster activation of curse. How do you get the curse to immediately go off? It's effectively this stat that you can find in this wheel right here, faster activation of curse. This wheel gives you about 70% of it. And then on top of this 70%, you can get here, you can also roll the stat on jewels. It's important to note you want to get it roughly 98, 99% faster activation of curse. You do not want to have a 100% or higher, because it will bug out and I don't think it will activate the Doedres Undoing. You can get this through a combination of 2 jewels with like 15% and 14%, or 2 jewels where you have 10%, 9%, 10%. You get the idea. You want to be roughly around 90% faster curse activation via the suffix mod you can get on jewels, faster activation of curse, plus speccing this wheel. I have enough from extra jewels that I could end up dropping this wheel and then anoint it, but that is how you would get it if you just have the whole wheel, which gives you 70%, and then get a little bit more elsewhere. There's also a pair of boots that makes the curse activation happen immediately, but I wouldn't particularly recommend those, as rare boots are quite strong. You can make that judgment call yourself depending on where you are investments wise on the character. Okay, so that's Doedres Undoing mechanically. Now let's talk about the Ascendancy. What are we doing? What are we building around? We're building around the Abyssal Lich. This is a new secret Ascendancy that you can unlock when you defeat Kulamak, the Abyssal boss, as a Lich. Once you beat him, he will offer you the ability to upgrade or change your Ascendancy, and essentially it changes the Ascendancies, or about half the Ascendancy nodes. It changes the Powers Charge, more damage node, into a Mirage Archer for spells, I think is roughly how I understand it. This does not work from Despair for my testing, unfortunately. I was hoping it would. It also changes this wheel, which is the Unholy Might wheel, into Umbral Well and Umbral Unwilling Offering, which this is where you get the whole reason I'm playing this character, Umbral Souls. It gives you a trade-off that says, for every skeleton you summon, instead of actually summoning the skeleton, I'm going to give you a passive benefit. It's a way to turn your spirit investment into some passive stats. Something like snipers, skeleton snipers gives proj speed. Really good if you wanted to play like a spark. Abyssal Lich, I think that would work pretty well, considering the new proj support makes proj speed apply to damage. So you could effectively have, like with this character, I have around 36 skeletons, so that would be roughly close to 600% proj speed. i.e. could get you close. Well, snipers might be a lower reservation amount, so you might be able to get more, but it would give you like 600% damage and 600 barrage speed would be like kind of crazy in terms of clear with spark. Or you could go for things like, I know Swaza did AoE with the Doedres Undoing, so he just giga over invested into AoE. I don't think that's necessary because you can get so much AoE from jewels, and that's what we ended up getting our triple overlap from, but you could invest into more AoE for other options as well. Spell damage, skill speed, you get the idea. I ended up going with the Skeletal Frost Mages for percent ES. You'll notice we have 42,000 ES. Part of the project or part of the fun of this build is I wanted to see how high we could get ES to, and that is from the Skeletal Frost Mages. 36 times 35, that's how much percent ES we have on this build from this Ascendancy. It's a little bit crazy. It's over 1,000% ES, which is funny to think about when there's about 12% life on the tree, and meanwhile, ES builds can get over 1,000% ES from an Ascendancy point. It's a little bit weird, you know, 100x difference. Maybe there's a bit of a balance issue there, but you know, is what it is. Next up, the other things that changed is Rupture the Flesh. This is normally a Chaos Explode Ascendancy, but in the Abyssal Lich, it's a Physical Explode. You probably noticed at the opening clip when I was showcasing a map, it makes the enemies do a green ploof explosion. That is just the changed in the animation to showcase, hey, this is a physical explosion, not a chaos one. And then the last one is Unwilling Offering, which gives you the ability for the offerings to affect yourself. I didn't test this one as much because it seemed a little bit I was like looking over the offering buffs, and it just seemed like you're like, oh, 30% cast speed, 50% spell damage. They didn't seem particularly huge, and it also required me to get an extra minion to then do an offering on, but you can't do skeletons, so you have to do like a specter or something. Like, it's a little bit weird, so I wasn't sure about this one. Maybe it would be a decent option. I don't know too much about offering buffs, but from when I was looking over the page of offerings, they didn't seem particularly strong. To add in an extra button and have a little bit less quality of life didn't seem worth it. So that one seems a little bit out of place, but maybe there's some decent options with it. Anyways, that's the Abyssal Lich Ascendancy change, and we were using it specifically to build our own Umbra Well. I was hoping the Mirage Archer thing would work, but it only works with damaging spells, not with Despair, proccing Doedres Undoing. That does not count for proccing this Mirage Archer spell thing. Alrighty, so that is the Ascendancy. Now for the building blocks of the character. Obviously, we have a lot of Skeletal Frost Mages that are turned into giving us ES, so we're getting a lot of Spirit. How are we doing this, and what is the benefits? So the benefits are obviously a bunch of ES. We have 42,000 ES. Just to showcase the difference this thing makes, I'm going to go ahead and unreserve all of these. We were at 42,000. Look at the difference this makes. With none reserved, we have 14,000 ES. So this Ascendancy point with those reservations is effectively accounting for 28,000 ES. Over 66% of my ES scaling is from those skeletal Frost Mages being reserved. Now, I want to note real quick here, I way over invested in Energy Shield. At 40k ES is just an unreasonable number for how this game is balanced, is way overkill. You should definitely invest into other things like Withering Presence, Convalescence, maybe even Archmage is a good damage multiplier for the build. You have other options. I specifically did Frost Mages because I want to see the number go up, okay? I like seeing the number go up, that's why. So anyways, how did we get that much reservation, and what are the benefits aside from the ES? So, in terms of getting the Spirit, we did a bunch of flat Spirit from Scepter. With a Scepter with Spirit sockets, you can get up to 220 with max rolls. You could technically take this to 230 with a Corruption, or a little bit higher with a Sanctification if you have like Giga Luck on a Divine max roll. But 200 something is roughly your top end for a Spirit in terms of a Scepter. You can get roughly about 65-ish from a Amulet between T1 Spirit and the Implicit. You can get another 60 from your chest piece. So between these three items, we have about 340 Spirit here. You have the baseline of about 100 from just the campaign. So you're about 440 Spirit there. We still have another 200 Spirit. How did we get there? We got there with Against Darkness, another great option for getting flat Spirit. You'll notice this is 12 Spirit per notable, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notables within radius. I like this combination because it was a cheap from nothing jewel that gave us gain damage, which is useful. And then it allowed us to pick up some extra notables that activated are against darkness, which gave us spirit and int. Int gives us base damage for Doedre's Undoing, and then spirit helps us scale the spirit more for more skeletons, etc. So from those 7, we have about 80 something flat spirit. That takes us to 500 something. And then last but not least, we have percent spirit scaling via Grand Spectrum and via this node here. So that's how we got close to 600 plus spirit. And then other additional sources you could get for spirit is if you corrupted 30 spirit on helmet, you can get a flat number there. You could theoretically also go the new unique rings that can roll percent spirit. For example, I'll showcase this one right here, 6% spirit. It can also have mods that say flat spirit if you have at least 200 int. So if you get like a combination of those, you could like giga scale spirit more. However, this character is very, very tight on suffixes everywhere. So I ended up going for Tenebrous rings, so that way I could fit in some res and some cast speed and other stats I wanted for the build. But you get the idea. If you really wanted to scale spirit, you have options to do so. So spirit is giving us a bunch of reservations for percent ES, but it's not only doing that, it's also all of our percent damage. This focus here, the Threaded Light, a very low level focus. You can actually equip this in like Act 1. Right now I have a rune in it that's giving it a higher level requirement, but I believe it's like a level 5 or something focus. It gives a bunch of percent spell damage based on how much spirit you have. So with 600 rough spirit, this is giving almost 900% damage from the shield alone. Now with a corruption, this can roll all the way up to 15%. At max regular divine, it's 12%. So I'd shop around and look for at least one with 12%. That's the idea. So spirit's giving us all of our percent damage scaling and all of our percent ES scaling. And technically, if you wanted to be a little bit more tactful about your build, you could cut back on some of these skeletons, add in things like Withering Presence, add in things like Convalescence, and that would make the character a more well-rounded package. So hopefully the concepts are making some sense here. Spirit gives us percent ES, it gives us spell damage, and technically some tertiary benefits from things like reservations. Another thing I want to point out here is when you use a scepter, I was told this wasn't the case anymore, but from testing, it definitely still works this way. You can also get some free extra spirit reservations for like things like mana regen, spell damage, less shock duration, less ignite duration. Ignite's pretty annoying with ES builds, so that feels pretty good. And then I'm combining that with chill immunity from the crystallized immunities down at the bottom of the tree. So this still works as far as I can tell to give you free spirit reservations if you attach it to the aura tied to the scepter. And another reason why we went with a shrine scepter is because it gives res. Initially, when I was theory crafting this build, I planned to do a discipline scepter. The problem with discipline scepter is it does not scale. So for example, the discipline scepter could give you 400 flat ES, which would be insane if it scaled. We'd be well past 50k if the discipline actually worked, but it doesn't scale with ES modifiers. So the difference in me wearing a discipline scepter and not wearing a discipline scepter is the difference in this ES number saying 42,300 instead of 42,069 like it does currently. So just so you know, so you don't make the mistake I did. I actually I don't know if this is fortunate or unfortunate, but I spent a lot of money trying to fracture a specific mod on a discipline scepter. I missed every single time. And eventually I found out that the discipline ES doesn't actually scale, which makes it a very bad aura compared to something like Purity of Ice, which is giving us like 50 cold res, which actually feels pretty decent for a little extra boost of power. Okay. Hopefully I've described a lot of the mechanics. Now we'll go over a bit of the planning or tree of the character. Obviously, we needed to scale a lot of int for flat damage, cast speed for how often we hit, and the spell damage is through the spirit. So cast speed you get largely from gear pieces, and then int you get largely from your tree. Like all your travel passes are int. You have nodes like Ingenuity, you have nodes like Calibration, and then you can also get a decent amount of int on gear. For me, min-maxing, it was trying to force int on basically every single piece of gear while squeezing out every little bit of res I could. And that's the character we have. This was a hyper specific min-max project if I just wanted to see how much ES we could get to. If you really are wanting to play this character, I want to give you some hope here that it's actually pretty decent on a more budget setup. Rise did it on his League starter, and his character, I think, performed pretty well, and he had a lot of fun with it. And Uber Elite was in my stream yesterday saying he did it on a super budget setup, and it's worked out well for him. Ultimately, if you wanted to league start this character, I would look at Ryze's league starter, or I could recommend going for non-Abyssal Lich. Look at doing a Dark Defiler Scepter, which gives you gain damage based on how many skeletons you get on the ground, on top of using Threaded Light and like an Alpha's Howl. Stuff like that could give you a decent amount of base spirit, and you just end up going for quite a bit less in terms of ES scaling, and it would work out probably pretty well. And then instead of going like CI, you could consider going Soulless Form Eternal Life, or you could even consider going the regular Lich nodes, which give Unholy Might, mana, gain damage scaling, stuff like that. Because the build at a baseline, the gain 200% int is a decent amount of flat damage, especially considering you can have it give overlapping damage. You always have the curse applying to enemies. Like, its scaling baseline is decent enough that you can make it work on some level of budget if you want to try it. I, of course, just want to do this as a min-max project. I had a lot of fun with it. So I'm saying if you give it a try, maybe you'd have some fun too. But of course, check out some of those more budget setups to see if it's really something you're interested in, because you don't want to say, okay, I see how good this character is based on like the super min-max setup. You want to make your judgment based on a much more affordable setup. Hence, I'm recommending checking out Ryze's videos on the character, which I will link down below. I think he made some videos on his league start setup. So yeah, that is the Doedres Undoing character. Basically a project that was to see how much ES we could get, see if we could take advantage of the new Abyssal Lich Ascendancy, and try out some new skills. For example, the Doedres Undoing support. I had a lot of fun with the character. Hopefully you guys enjoy this video going over it. Maybe it piques your interest to try it. I think the next project for PoE 2 for me, we started out as a life stacker, which was a lot of fun with the Blood Mage. Then we did this character, which I just wanted to use Abyssal Lich, and we scaled. We ended up seeing how much ES we get. We got to 42,000. I think for the next build, I think it'd be fun to do a mana scaling character, complete the trifecta of the raw EHPs, life, mana, and ES. I think that'd be a little fun to round off this PoE league for me. So I'm thinking next one we're gonna do is gonna be I want to do a Ritualist hammer throw mana scale. We'll see how it goes. I don't know. I have some ideas in my head, and we'll see if it ends up working out. As always, hopefully you guys enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, and take care. I'll see you in the next one. Have a good one, guys.